Oh look, here I am again. Well, having singed the Democrats just a bit, I've come back to scorch the Republicans. It just goes to show I'm an equal opportunity flamethrower. Now, about those rascally Republicans, those anarchists, those patriotic warlord wannabes. Well, I think we all have a pretty good idea now what kind of people populate the Republican Party, certainly what kind of people lead the Republican Party. A more venal, mendacious, disingenuous, insincere band of thugs, bullies, and villains you'll not find in 5 centuries. And they're all living right here in our beautiful country. Lovely. So here's the thing. What are we going to do about it? I'm not going to recite a litany of Republican crimes and misdeeds against this country. Don't need to. We all have our own little black book of things that the Republicans have done to damage this country. We need to move forward. And we need to focus on how best to undo the legacy of the Republican Party. And not just in the past year. I'm talking about undo the legacy of the last 150 years, last 160 years since the founding of the party. I do want to recap briefly about that, just so that we all have a better context of what the Republicans are all about anyway. The Republicans are all about business, pure and simple. They were founded in 1856 by a group of businessmen who felt that the government of the United States was not friendly enough or supportive enough or appreciative enough of the contributions to the American economy, the American culture, and the American nation. So, by golly, they're going to have a political party that reflects that. And they came up with the idea of a Republican Party. And for 160 years, the Republican Party has stood consistently and steadfastly for absolutely 2 things. 1, war, because war is good for business. War is always good for business. So any Republican candidate is going to support a war, whatever war the United States is sort of leaning towards at that time, or if we are living in a time of relative peace, then by golly, it's time we had another war. After the Civil War was the war against the Indians. After the Indian Wars was the Spanish-American War. And then there was the war in the Philippines. And then after World War I, and the country was getting back on a good track, then there was those wars in Nicaragua and Central America. And it goes on and on and on. Read the history of the Republican Party. And of course, the greatest war that the Republican Party got us into was the Cold War. Well, that finally came to an end. But guess what, folks? Thanks to Donald Trump, we're coming back to the new Cold War. Cold War II. But what are we going to do about it? It's not enough to simply vote the bastards out. Because if we do that and figure our work here is done and just walk away congratulating ourselves, I assure you, the Republicans are going to be back 2 years after that. They're going to be back in 2020 with a vengeance. And if you thought Donald Trump was bad, wait till you see what Steve Bannon's going to do. And Steve Bannon is going to support. I don't think I need to give you much on that because you already know. You already have a pretty good idea of what Steve Bannon represents. Well, imagine more of the same, only more strident, more belligerent, more bellicose. Whatever Donald Trump isn't able to accomplish in his administration, by God, Steve Bannon will do it. So, how do we stop that? Well, there's a clue in the founding and the loyalty of the Republican Party. The loyalty is to corporate interests. Far more so than any Democratic administration, Republican administrations are top-heavy with relocated corporate executives. The Trump administration is in your face about that. Steve Mnuchin, Betsy DeVos, and others. Business interests run the government because that's the way the Republicans want it, because that's the way the Republican Party wants it. So what are we going to do about that? We have to understand who the corporate sponsors of the Republican Party are. We have to identify who the corporate sponsors of the Republican Party. We have to understand which corporations, which companies, which industries are giving the Republican Party its agenda and its political marching orders. Well, I can give you a few names right now. Home Depot, big pharmaceutical industries, banking and financial industries, insurance industries, modern telecommunications providers, Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, all of them contribute generously to the Republican Party. So do chemical companies, DuPont, Allied. So do the defense contractors. Even when they're not bidding on defense contracts, they are still lobbying the government to get more of our money for projects that the government doesn't really need, in favor of projects that the government and the people of this country could really use. I mean, for example, can you imagine what the public transportation infrastructure of this country would look like? How much better it would be if Boeing or Boeing McDonnell Douglas used its engineering expertise to build a transnational monorail or electrical rail system, instead of relying on old-fashioned 19th century style railroads or 20th century interstate highways. That's just one for instance. I will dwell on that sort of thing in a future speech, in a future rant. But for right now, I want to return to the question, what can we do about the Republicans? Well, as I said, simply voting them out is not a solution. The solution is going to be in identifying their corporate sponsors, the companies, the industries, and the rich individuals, like, for example, the Koch brothers, calling them out, challenging them, making them spend more money than they deem it is worth. Chase them out of the political arena. They don't belong there anyway. Never mind what Citizens United, which is an abomination of a Supreme Court ruling. Never mind that. So, my recommendation to all of us is to find out which corporate interests, which special interests are supporting Republican candidates. Boycott them, protest them, demonstrate on their sidewalks, call them out, put the heat to them, make them accountable to the public for what they're doing and what they are hiring and paying the Republican Party to do. Go get them.